Hi, my name is Samir Salim and I'll be your host for today's webinar presented by Royal Cyber. The webinar is based on Secure Your Enterprise Portal with Portal Security Best Practices. This webinar is based on the latest IBM Websphere Portal 8.5 security features. Royal Cyber has been in the IT consultation industry for more than 10 years. That's about a decade, and offers support for IBM and Microsoft related products. This year we'll be starting our services on Salesforce as well. Royal Cyber has more than 500 IT consultants located over 8 locations worldwide who provide world-class customer service experience to our customers. Some of our expertise is in Websphere Portal, Connections, Same Time, Wickham, Lotus Notes and Domino, Experience Factory, which was formerly known as the Portlet Factory, Lotus Notes, Traveler, Protector, Mail Security, Lotus Quicker, Forms, Workflow, SAP Solutions, and etc. Some of our offerings and solutions include analyzing and designing the infrastructure, custom portal design and development, 24/7 technical support, which includes a remote IM call and on-site services as well. Comprehensive trainings as well. So Royal Cyber is located in 8 locations worldwide, which includes our headquarters in the United States, South Africa, Pakistan, United Kingdom, Saudi Arabia, India, Canada, and Australia, and that offers and ensures high availability of our engineers and consultants all over. Today's webinar will be presented by Mr. Amir Shah, who is our technology consultant in Royal Cyber. Amir is an expert IT professional with over 8 years of experience in software engineering, computer networks, operating systems, and databases. He has specialities in IBM software solutions including Notes, Domino, Same Time, Quicker, IBM Connections, CCM, IBM Websphere Portal, Portlet Factory, and Websphere Application Server. He has also got an expertise in Windows Network Infrastructure solutions, and has been serving Royal Cyber for more than 3 years, and has been included in deploying and planning for some of the best projects that Royal Cyber has done till date. So today's webinar is based on the secure and enterprise. This is because in 2014 you might be aware that enterprises were hit by several attacks on their portals, and that has led CIOs to actually spend time and effort and money on security. So this webinar hopefully will help you in making an understanding how you can implement security in IBM Websphere Portal server. So without any further ado, I would like to give the presentation to Mr. Amir. Thank you.
Hello everyone, welcome to this webinar. Moving forward, the table of contents that we have, first we'll look at the security. We'll have a short brief on that. After that, we'll see the things that are required in the analyzation part, how we can analyze the portal infrastructure, the things that are need to be identified and recorded. Then we'll look at securing our communication using different protocols and how we can guard the cookies and handle sessions correctly. Then we'll look at the portal security features and the access control mechanism. In that, we'll look at the portlets, pages, themes, external security managers. We'll talk about impersonation, remember me, and step-up authentication. We'll see on credential vault and Ajax proxy, and we'll also look at auditing, authentication, and authorization. At the end, we'll look at vulnerability assessment, how we can scan our servers and close unwanted access, and how we can prevent code level vulnerabilities. At the end, we'll look at some useful links, and then we'll have a question and answer session. When we talk about security, security is actually a very big subject, and it becomes more complex when we have different systems integrated together. So to simplify things, let's narrow down to these fundamental security concepts. So we pull together this 6 security concepts. The first is authentication. The authentication stage is when you try to verify a user's identity. Authentication tells that who is this user. Then we come on the authorization part. Authorization is actually when we try to give or determine user rights so he or she can access data. Authorization answers that what the user can do. In confidentiality, we try to prevent unauthorized disclosure of data. Informally, we can say how to keep secrets. Then the data integrity part comes. This part is when we try to detect and prevent unauthorized modification of data by restricting man-in-the-middle attack or sniffing attacks. Then we have non-repudiation. It is when we associate a user's identity with an action. Then we come on the trust part. Trust is when your system relies on other components. For example, if we talk about IBM Websphere Portal, then what trust it has with Websphere application server, and the trust that is being forwarded from the Websphere application server to Websphere Portal. So keeping these 6 points in mind, let's move forward on the analyzing your portal infrastructure part. So during the identify and recording details session, the first thing that we should have is the infrastructure diagram. The diagram will point us to all the components that are present in our portal infrastructure. The firewalls, the load balancers, either we are using any external security managers like Web Seal, Tivoli Access Manager, Security Access Manager, as we say now, as well as if we are using Spango, OpenID Authentication, or OAuth, if we are using like when we are using Facebook or Google for authentication. Similarly, we need to note that if there are any federated repositories are being used in portal authentication, the virtual portals, any that are made on with the base portal on Websphere portal, and the VLMs that are being used with those virtual portals. Then for operating systems, web servers and application servers, as well as for portal servers, we have to have all the information of the patches that are being applied, the ports that are opened, the protocols being used. On the web server level, if there are any redirection rules in place, as well as any forwarders if we are using any. For application server, the security setting of the application server, any fixed patches being applied, what sort of user repositories we are using at the back end, either standalone or federated repository. For portal server level, we must have a site hierarchy, and also we have to know that what users and groups are assigned to roles, and then similarly the roles assigned to the pages and portlets. After recording all this information, it may not be practical for you to immediately install fixes on your production systems. So at a minimal level, you should establish a procedure and schedule for evaluating vulnerabilities, installing security fixes, and testing your application. You can consider using CVSS, that is Common Vulnerability Scoring System, scores as the basis for your decision on installation schedule. These scores will actually help you pinpoint that what vulnerability is critical and what is not. So based on those scores, you can define your schedules on installing fixes on your portal infrastructure. You should also install fixes on the parts that are integrated with your application. For example, any client browsers, if they are using any plugins like Java, on the application server operating systems, both client and the server operating system, on the web servers, on the databases, if you are using external security managers or LDAP servers, then you should make a schedule for installing fixes on them as well. For IBM products, you can subscribe to response blog and support portal blogs, so you can have up to the minute information via email for any vulnerability found. So you can go to this link and can subscribe to that as well. Let's look at securing communication. So generally when we see users connect to portal environment using HTTP protocol, and therefore we secure this channel using different protocols and security layers. HTTP over TLS or HTTPS, commonly known, allows web application to leverage TLS in order to secure communications with clients. Similarly, we use TLS, which is a successor of secure socket layer, and it provides a mean of securing communication over the internet. When we implement TLS effectively, properly, it ensures confidentiality by encrypting communication to guard against eavesdropping or spying, we can say. Also, it ensures confidentiality by guarding against man-in-the-middle attacks. It also helps ensure data integrity by guarding against replay attacks. Since these communications include sensitive information as application data and single sign-on cookies, IBM recommends enabling HTTPS over Websphere Portal. There is a common procedure, common requirements on IBM Websphere Portal on the Info Center. It says to encrypt all communication between the browser and the web server for content served from the personalized home, that is WPS/my portal, and that is secure by default in Websphere Portal version 8.5. The Websphere application server plugin forwards any request received over HTTPS to the inbound default secure port of the application. Therefore, if the browser to the web server communications are encrypted, the web server to application server communication will be encrypted as well by default. Encrypting the HTTP post with the user credential in the default login portlet is also a common requirement. But if you use a custom login portlet, you can work with your portal developers, the portlet developers, to ensure that it similarly protects user credentials. We have some recommended actions and consideration for the protocols. The first thing, you need to enable HTTPS as per InfoCenter common requirements. Then you need to evaluate whether the requirements listed above are fulfilled or not. Third thing is you have to redirect all the traffic coming on HTTP to HTTPS. You can write redirection rules forwarders on your web server to do that. The fourth thing is you can block the inbound default port and allow communication only over secure channel on the inbound default secure port. The fifth thing is, if you are using XML access remotely, then you need to ensure that you are using an encrypted channel, a secure channel for that. Now let's look at cookies and session handling. In Websphere environment, cookies enable single sign-on and session tracking, and unauthorized parties could circumvent Websphere Portal security controls if they are given access to these cookies. The two cookies that are being used, one is Ltpa token 2 and the other is session ID, JSession ID. Websphere application server relies on this Ltpa token 2 cookie for single sign-on, and it considers a client to be authenticated if the user presents a valid Ltpa2 token. For JSession ID, from the Java Servlet specification, Websphere Portal Session Management uses this cookie. So for these, we have some recommendations and there are some considerations as well. First is, you need to define the domain attribute value for these cookies as narrowly as your functional requirements permit. You can leave these values unset unless you have a very specific requirement for single sign-on or you are sharing session identifiers. If there is no domain set on a cookie, the browser would submit it only with the request to the server that sets it. So if your functional requirements dictates, you can set the domain attribute value on these cookies. Second, you need to set the secure attribute on these cookies. When you set secure attribute on the cookies, it tells the browser to present these cookies only over HTTPS secure channel. Third is, you need to set the HTTP only attribute on these cookies. So if your functional requirement permits, you can set this attribute on the cookies. This will actually tells the browser to disallow access to JavaScript. We set it to actually guard against cross-site scripting sort of attacks. Sometimes application may require access to the session identifier on the client side. So if your custom JavaScript need access to JSession ID, you should not set HTTP only attribute on the cookies. Rather than that, you can rely on security integration and cross-site scripting protections to guard the session. Number 4, you need to set the Ltpa token to expiration as short as possible. The default value is 120 minutes. As long as the client presents a valid Ltpa token 2 to Websphere application server, it considers the user authenticated. The expiration is actually encoded in Ltpa token 2 value and is not part of the set cookie directive inside Websphere application server. Coming to the 5th point, you need to set the inactive session timeout. The inactive session timeouts tells when the session has to be invalidated. So the inactive session timeout value by default is 30 minutes. By this you can restrict the user if they leave their browser session open, then that session will be timed out. So if your functional specifications permits you, then keep these value as short as possible. The 6th point is you need to disable Ltpa interoperability mode. The reason behind that is when you enable the Ltpa token interoperability mode, it actually creates another token, that is Ltpa token. So now if you enable it, we have 2 tokens. One is Ltpa token and one is Ltpa token 2. Ltpa token is actually used with the backend old systems if you have in your environment. And Ltpa token also has a lesser encryption than Ltpa token 2. So the recommendation is to disable Ltpa token interoperability mode, so the Ltpa token is not being generated, not being created. The last point is enable security integration. The security integration is important because in the session management, you can restrict users or tighten the security it will actually there are certain errors that may occur if an authenticated user try to access an anonymous session. So to guard against such errors, the security integration, when it is enabled, it will help you guard against those errors. So the basic point of enabling security integration is this: and this is actually enabled by default in Portal 8.5. You can enable security integration quickly by going into the console, and in the web security settings, in the journal settings, you can enable it from there by selecting the use available authentication data when an unprotected URI is accessed. Okay, let's look at the portal security features and access control now. So for portlets, pages, and themes in Websphere Portal actually provides access control on its resources. The access control models actually allows role mapping to propagate down to the resource hierarchy, and it also allows you to override this propagation and allows group members to inherit mappings from their groups. Websphere Portal also provides managed pages, and it provides a method of adjusting access control during page authoring and publishing life cycle through projects and workflows. So when you look at the roles and the user access, you need to adhere to the principle of least privilege when you are assigning access rights to portlets, pages, and for example, if a user need a customized copy of a page, a user need to customize any page or the user interface, then the privileged user role on that page would be appropriate. The user role would not be appropriate because then it will not permit the customization of that page, and the administrative role would not be appropriate as well because then user can delete the page. So these kind of things you need to take care of. Then you need to check in your portal environment that what functional roles do users have within your application. You have to define groups in your user repositories that represents these functional roles. Then you need to map these groups to roles on Websphere Portal and Content Manager resources. Simply associations make it easier to understand the role mappings, and that will minimize the potential for human errors which could expose resources to unauthorized users. So the recommendations we have for this is, the first thing is do not share login IDs among different users. This is particularly important for auditing. For example, multiple administrators should have their own administrative account rather than sharing the WPS admin ID. If you have a federated repository and if users in a single functional role span to multiple LDAPs, then you can consider using application groups to simplify group structure. Similarly, if you have a read-only LDAP, you need to study the resource hierarchy and role hierarchy and consider the implications of inheritance. For example, if you grant all authenticated portal users the privileged user role on the home label, they would inherit that role and on all child pages of this label by default. Also, like if you grant anonymous portal user the user role on the virtual resource users to enable people finder on anonymous pages, the access control checks if the Puma REST service meet the security requirements or not. Also, you need to make sure that the base portal must be associated with the default realm, and the default realm must be a superset of the participating base entries of other VLMs. For example, the base VLM user should be able to log in on the base portal, and if there is any other user that is in an other VLM, then that user should log in on that VLM only. It would not be able to log in to the base portal. Also, you need to control access as tightly as possible on the live site, on the published site. In the portal security features, if you are using external security managers, they are actually an independent applications that perform authentication and authorization for your web application. So for example, if you are using a web seal on the front, or if you are using SiteMinder or OpenID authentication like Facebook or Google for authentication, then for that you need to ensure that the trust association interceptor, the TIE you are using in Websphere application server, is secure. Then you need to verify that logging off, when the user logs off, the cookies that are being generated are from the ESM or from the Websphere, that they should be clear on both server and client level. Then you can externalize resources such that an ESM controls access and authorization for administrative convenience. You also need to ensure that the communication link between the Websphere portal and the ESM, your external security manager, is secure. Also, you can set the timeout.resume.session value and persistent.session.level configuration setting in Websphere application server. These values are often used to avoid timing problems with external security manager session, and when the session goes invalidated. If you set these, you need to recognize that they are effectively overridden on the Websphere application level as well, and the Websphere application server inactive session timeout also meets with that. Now let's look at the impersonation feature. Impersonation feature is actually when a user tries to see how the content will look like as an end user. For example, when authors try to see how the user interface will look like when they are creating a user interface, or when theme developers are designing a theme and they want to see how the page will look like as an end user. So they can use use the impersonation feature that will show them how it will appear at the end user level. So it is mostly used for authors, reviewers, and help desk personnel when the help desk personnel are supporting end users. So for this, you need to check that you really need impersonation or not. Also, if your application requires impersonation to be enabled or not, do your security requirements permit impersonating any arbitrary user? You can think if, like when you are enabling impersonation, then do a user has access to your CEO level, if he can impersonate CEO or not. So this kind of thing you need to make sure. Also, does your application participate in single sign-on with other application via Ltpa? And do your security requirements permit impersonation without their consent, without user authority? If you are impersonating, if impersonation is enabled in your environment, then you should enable auditing for impersonation events as well. The Remember Me and Step-Up authentication. Remember Me cookie is based on persistent cookies that is used in browser to save the user state. The step-up authentication enforces strict authentication. If you are trying to give strict authentication on the lower level of resources, recommendations for those is enable the Remember Me cookie only if your application requires it. If it does not require, then do not enable it. And carefully consider your security requirements on the Remember Me cookies before enabling them. In Java 2 Enterprise Edition authentication, if it is enabled, then review the resource hierarchy and assign any particularly sensitive resources an authentication level higher than the defined. In step-up authentication, it will then enforce users to submit credentials to access those resources. The users will be asked for credentials when they try to access that resource on which you have enabled step-up authentication. In Credential Vault feature, it's like a wallet inside a Websphere portal. You can save the URLs, user ID and password in that. It allows portlets to access other applications using credentials that is obtained from the vault. So recommended actions for that is use single sign-on methodology to access back-end application rather than using Credential Vault. If you must use passive credentials, recognize that the default Vault adapter only is base 64 in codes and stored credentials in Websphere Portal database. Set export.enforce SSL to ensure that the XML access request to export Credential Vault slots are secured. Ajax proxy, it is a component inside Websphere Portal and it enables both client-side scripts and server-side code to access external services via the server. If within a portlet, if you want to show some resource of from another site or another data, if you are using a backend, another system backend, you can use Ajax proxy to display the content of that site within your Websphere Portal environment. So recommended actions for that is check what level of trust do you place in site accessed through the Ajax proxy. You should also check that which portlets need to access the backend applications. If only one or few portlets, then consider using application scoped profiles. Also check users and clients need access through the Ajax proxy, what users and clients need access. Also, if the application access through the Ajax proxy requires authentication, how is that being achieved within your portal infrastructure? In auditing in Websphere Portal, it allows you to audit certain administrative events such as impersonation. Auditing can be enabled by you for user management and for access control. It is disabled by default and you can enable auditing excuse me, you can enable auditing service from the IBM console, secure console, and going to the resource environment provider, selecting the WP audit service, custom properties, and you can enable that from there. The recommended actions for that is enable audit logging for all events for which non-repetition is a security requirement in your application. Doing so allows you to associate a user's identity with the action. As a deterrent, inform users that they are being audited and the auditing is enabled. Certain actions like modifying page layout are not auditable by default. However, if you are sufficiently restrict access and leverage managed pages as described, you could implement auditing in custom workflows to log these events as well. Authentication is how can users log into your application. Websphere Portal primarily relies upon Websphere application server component for authenticating. In turn, Websphere application server may trust external security managers by using trust association interceptors, Spango to authenticate users, default login portlet. You need to check if you are using default login portlet or custom login portlets. What authentication filters, interfaces are being used. You need to check that as well in the authentication phase. Recommended actions and consideration ensure that user credential, username and password are encrypted during transmission. Evaluate whether your application requires the automatic login URL. Websphere Portal offers only minimal controls over password strength via the Puma validation service. Websphere Portal does not limit the number of times a user may submit the wrong password, so you can check that from the backend LDAP server, or you can build a custom mechanism for restricting users during the authentication phase. The WCAM Web Content Manager comes with its own login.jsp portlet, and you can use servlet. So you can use that servlet and you can refer to Advanced Security Hardening in Websphere Application Server Part 1 and 2 for most other authentication considerations. Refer to third-party documentation for Tivoli Access Manager and CA SiteMinder, Spango. Authorization is when you are giving access permissions to users to do something or to have access control on something. You see that what can user do on the portal. By default, Websphere Portal gives certain roles and access to users out of the box to make it usable, and that could not be appropriate for your application security requirements. So you need to review the initial access control session. You can review the section in the info center, and you need to pay particular attention to the special users and groups like anonymous portal user, all authenticated portal user. So you need to pay particular attention to the default role assignment where all authenticated portal user is assigned privileged user at home label. Review the default permission associated with the managed pages. Compare these to the security requirements of your application. Update role mappings, role blocks, and or group membership as needed. Reference the info center section for controlling accesses. Okay, vulnerability assessment. In this part, how for scanning your server, we tend to actually analyze all the server and application present in our portal infrastructure. This process should be performed after every So 3 months, or as per your compliance requirements. If you want PCI DSS or HIPAA or any other compliance, then you can follow the requirements for scanning as per that. But IBM offers some really good tools like IBM Security App Scan. You can use it within your development team as well, and it provides a much granular access and scanning capabilities to analyze your portal infrastructure. You can use IBM QRadar. That is another product. You can implement that in your infrastructure. For other solutions, we have other third-party solutions like Qualys. You can use that, Qualys web application scanning and web application firewall, as well as Qualys PCI compliance also for scanning your servers. Okay, in closing unwanted access, these are the steps we pulled out that based on your scan reports. If you are using AppScan or any other, close unwanted ports and protocols, unauthorized anonymous access to your application, delete unwanted user ID in groups, rename default users. If you cannot rename, then you should use good password quality, like 13 alphanumeric characters, uppercase, lowercase, and special characters. Do not use dictionary words. And the other steps, you can see that maintaining a regular schedule for updating Ltpa keys, run Websphere portal as non-root users, and so on. We are running short on time, so I'll proceed further. Preventing code level vulnerabilities. There are cross-site scripting, request forgery, injection, and redirection. You can get all information on these from Google as well. These 4 are the major code level vulnerabilities that we pulled out, and the recommended actions for them are listed here. Like for cross-site scripting, ensure that all custom components HTML encoded, anything they contribute to page source, check them thoroughly. Ensure that all custom components follow other best practices to guard against cross-site scripting. Scan your application with automated web security tools. We have some useful links here, like the common vulnerability and exposure. On this side, it has a dictionary of security vulnerability, and you can visit this site for all the well-known vulnerabilities that are in your portal environment or on your application server. So you can get all that information from here. For the you can visit the IBM Websphere Portal 8.5 Info Center for web security concept and consideration. For IBM Websphere Portal Administrator, you can go to this link and go through that as well. There is a very good open source security project, the OWASP.org. You can visit that and check the top 10 vulnerabilities. There is an open source vulnerability scanner and manager, openvas.org. You can check that as well. For the paid version of vulnerability scanner, Nessus is a well-known worldwide tool that you can use. Now you can ask if you have any question and answer, and handing over this session to Samir here with me.